the camera's ready. Look to the right. The Chicago Sun-Times building, built in 1977 by Skidmore, Owens, and Merrill, has been voted the ugliest building on the Chicago River. There you go. Now, the plot of land in front of it to our right, this is called Wolf Point. Wolf Point is owned by the Kennedy family. The Kennedys are currently building 3 skyscrapers here. First one's done, 500 feet tall. People are starting to move in. There'll be 2 more, 750 feet tall and 900 feet tall, complete by 2021. The Kennedys are reshaping Chicago's skyline. Now, Wolf Point is also where Chicago set down its roots as a city in the 1820s after Fort Dearborn in 1803. We officially became a town in 1837, but we needed a name to our town, so we sent our town leaders to the Wolf Point Tavern. We said, figure out the name for this town. But when guys get together and they start drinking, brilliant ideas come out. They decided to name this town Chicago because it sounded like the Native American term Chicagua, which the Native Americans use all the time when referring to this area. They thought Chicago, Chicagua, bada bing, bada boom, we got a name. What they didn't know is that Chicago translates to stinky, smelly onions. That's the only definition of Chicago. Chicago literally means stinky, smelly onions. Why did the Native Americans say Chicago all the time? They were referring to the onions that used to grow wild like crazy on the banks of the river and the lake and the marshland that we built the city on top. We're heading onto the north branch of the river. Look to the left in front of the boat. Beautiful blue glass building with all these balconies is the Residences of Riverbend, built in 2002 by James Stefano. Look at the center section there, the glass is frosted out. That's the parking garage. If you bought yourself a parking space for a modest $40,000, you can't even park your own car. It's too narrow. There's no ramps. What do? Hand your keys to a valet. He takes you to an elevator, parks it for you. Every single unit was built facing east. Why? So these people could always enjoy their amazing view down the main branch of the Chicago River. Thanks, Kennedy family. Now, they tried to sue the Kennedys to stop them from building. As you can see, you don't sue the Kennedys and live. Look in front of the boat to the left. The Fulton House is getting a facelift. That's because the building was built in 1908 by Frank D. Abbott. There's a giant freezer, a cold storage warehouse through most of its life. When the building was turned into private living spaces in 1982 by Harry Weiss, he had to remove 500 truckloads of horsehair from this building. What? Why? Horsehair is what they used to line the double-thick walls to keep the insulation when it was a cold storage warehouse. In front of the boat to the left, there is nothing else like this in Chicago, folks. These are the Chicago River cottages. Built in 1988 by Harry Weiss, 4 independent homes right on the river. They're the only ones in the city to have their own private dock in the downtown, their own private parking. How much do those cost, right?
Yeah.
We didn't know from 88 when they were built until last year. Why? All 4 original owners lived there. So last year, the smallest unit sold for $3.2 million.
Wow.
As we head under Kinsey Street Bridge, we're looking in front of the boat and to the right. Road down here because our competitor Shoreline, they don't go any farther up, and I think it's a huge mistake that you've seen a little bit. We keep going farther down that road. So we got to kind of slow down and wait for them to go by. Now what's interesting is they go by, I've ridden their tour, they do a great job. They really do. It's a fantastic company. But you'll notice it's really weird. Every single time one of their boats go by, I look at our people and I look at their people, and I'm like, it's amazing. Our people are always so much more attractive than the people that just smart too, just smile and wave. There we go. We're on a boat, you're on a boat, and it's so exciting! But beyond them to the left, you're spitting so much. You're seeing a grouping of 70 European row house style townhomes. That's Kinsey Park, built in 2002 by Papa George and Haynes. Every single one of these has their own second floor balcony and rooftop terrace. This is a completely brick walled off private gated community inside the downtown. Now that comes at a price. Every single one of those sold for $1.2 million before a single one was even built. One sold last year for $2.2 million. Only thing available in Kinsey Park is a parking space for, you guessed it, $75,000. If you don't mind living in your car, that's an amazing location, very safe. I got a real estate agent to get cut. In front of the boat to the right, this red brick warehouse is a great example of adaptive reuse. This was a printing warehouse built in 1909 by George Haynes. Instead of tearing down the old printing warehouse to build a new condo building, they gutted it. They left the hardwood floor, the brick, the ductwork, these people pay lots of money for. They turned it into Chicago-style soft walls. This is happening all over the city of Chicago, adaptive reuse. Why? We have a ton of old warehouses in the city. We don't want to tear them all down. They have history, so we're going to let you live in them for ridiculous amounts of money. Now, Who remembers the old Montgomery Ward catalog company? Yeah, come on. I'm 25, I remember catalogs, okay? So we go. If you don't remember catalogs, it was Amazon before Amazon, okay? We're going to talk a lot about Aaron Montgomery Ward coming up here in a minute. In fact, the 4-acre park coming up on our right is the Montgomery Ward Park. Named after Aaron Montgomery Ward, 4 acres cost the city $10 million. Then they had to pay to build the park. Look to the right, you also see the first of 2 twin white, steel, and green glass buildings, Kingsbury in the park, Sister Mary in the park, built in 2002 by Lucy in the garage. You're saying, these buildings are complete. I promise you they are. This is the European industrial style of architecture, where they use the outer steel frame of the building, which is holding up the building as the decoration for the building. Very popular in Europe, not so much here in the United States. Off in the distance to the right, a massive expanse of blue glass, the building with the white concrete corners. That gorgeous structure is the Montgomery. Built in 1974, that was the global office headquarters to Montgomery Ward's catalog company. You're saying, Mark, that makes no sense. That's a global office headquarters for one of the largest corporations in the world at the time. Where are the corner offices for all the bigwigs? The building was designed specifically not to have corner offices. Why? Well, when Aaron Montgomery Ward started the company here in Chicago in the late 1800s, he said, if you work for this company, you're not better than anyone else who works for this company, no matter what position you hold. Long after his death, when they built a new building, they wanted to honor him. So they wanted to build no corner offices so no one would feel like they're better than anyone else. So they hired the famous architect Minoru Yamasaki to do that for them. Why him? 2 years earlier, in 1972, Minoru Yamasaki had completed the World Trade Center buildings in New York City. Do you remember those buildings? They didn't have corner offices. Used a very similar design in this building. We now live in the Montgomery instead. Now you guys have come to Chicago in the spring where one day you're dying of pneumonia and the next day you're sweating. You gotta come back to Chicago in the summer. We're the best summer city in this country, and it's because of our lakefront, and that's because of Aaron Montgomery Ward. He was the one who gave us the law. He spent $500,000 of his own money to make sure the law said you could not build a building on land, now Orlando, east of Lakeshore Drive. Because of that law, Chicago, Illinois is home to 27 miles of uninterrupted, continuous free public parks, beaches, walkways, and bike paths directly on our lakefront. No other city in the world comes nearly even half as close to Chicago. No boardwalks, no high-rises, no nothing. Just you, the free parks, the beaches. Stunning. As you can tell, we only get about 3 months to use the lake, so we go hard in the summer. To the right, this was the office headquarters of Montgomery Ward's in 1930 when it was built by William McCully. Again, adapted for use. The balconies certainly were there in the 30s. You can live in this building now. Get the cameras ready. This building has my favorite picture on the north branch of our river. As we head under Chicago Avenue Bridge, we're going to turn back and look to the right. Because at the northeast corner of this building, you'll see a 4-story ziggurat tower. At the very top, a 16-foot tall statue called Progress on the Road to Progress. There she is with the Montgomery back of. Isn't that stunning? If you miss it, you get another chance to take a picture as you head south. To the right, this massive concrete structure is aptly named the Domain, built in 1908 by Schmidt, Gardner Martin. This was the largest concrete structure in the world when it made its debut. This is the warehouse headquarters to Montgomery Ward's. Now look at it, it's in the prairie style of architecture. Note the horizontal lines, not the vertical lines. When the building was redone in 2002 by Papa George and Haynes, they found over 350 pairs of the old headquarters. Why? Aaron Montgomery Ward made sure if you were filling orders in this building, you were skating up and down this puppy to get them in and out, ASAP. The building's now, ironically, home to Groupon Chicago. To the right, the only island in the city limits of Chicago is a man-made island. That is Ogden Island, named after our first mayor, William B. Ogden. He had the canal dug out to the right, creating the 160-acre island. Why did he do that? He wanted clay for his brick company. This is a clay-based river. If you look for Ogden Island on a map, though, you're not going to find it. Why? Everyone in Chicago, even on the maps, we call that Goose Island. You may have heard the Goose Island beer, which we have on tap downstairs. Goose Island never brewed their beer in the island. They got their company name from the nickname of the island. How did it get the nickname Goose Island? Irish immigrants used to raise geese on the island. There used to be thousands of geese all the time. Chicagoans were pretty simple. We're like, yeah, it's Goose Island, that's what geese are. To the right, this massive red brick complex, the Chicago Tribune Freedom Center, built in 1981 by Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. This is not the headquarters of the Tribune, our largest newspaper. This is where they print their newspapers. Inside, you'll find 10 Metroliner Gauss printing presses, each one capable of printing 70,000 newspapers per hour. All 10 going at one time. That's 700,000 newspapers per hour, which was really cool in the 1980s when people used to buy newspapers. Yeah. People don't like getting as many newspapers anymore, so what do? They print their own. They print their main competitor, the Sun-Times, for a ton of money. They also print the Wall Street Journal here in Chicago. Get a good look at the building, you'll understand why it was voted the second ugliest building on the Chicago River. Both of our newspaper companies, Sun-Times and Tribune, both built by the famous architecture firm Skidmore, Owings & Merrill. The irony continues, folks. Yeah, it was the newspaper companies that polled readers wanting to know one of the most attractive and one of the ugliest buildings on the river. To their dismay, they came in first and second ugliest. But to their credit, they both printed the results admitting the buildings were the ugliest. So we got honest newspaper journalism in Chicago, if not for honest other things. All right, as we head south of the North Branch River, this is your opportunity to take pictures, move about the boat, grab a drink, run to the bathroom. Why? We've already seen everything on the North Branch River, so we're not going to be pointing and talking about anything. I get to take this time to fill your heads with some of the important history of Chicago. Don't worry, if you go downstairs, you should be able to hear me. We go all the way back to the year 1673. Two French explorers, Jacques Marquette, Louis Joliet, they were hired by France to chart out New France. France technically owned this area at the time, but they never made New France, which was really good for us. It means nothing happened here for over 100 years until the 1770s, when Jean-Baptiste Pont du Sable became the first non-Native American permanent Chicago. He set up the trading post right at the base of the Wrigley Building where we started our tour. He was Haitian, his mother was African. He married a Native American princess, learned the Native American languages, and made a fortune trading. He did so well that we set up that Fort Dearborn in 1803 across the river, where he started his trading post. We fast forward to the 1830s. Chicago, stinky, smelly onions. We're a town, woo! But we're a tiny town. At the end of the 1830s, our population is barely 3,000 people. But by 1871, less than 40 years later, the population of Chicago skyrockets to over 300,000 people. This leads us, of course, to the fateful night of October the 8th, 1871. The Great Chicago Fire. Now, you might have heard the rumor about the Great Chicago Fire. Catherine O'Leary walked out with a lantern to her barn, set it down. The cow Daisy knocked over the lantern, started the Great Chicago Fire. We know for a fact, that's a made-up newspaper story. We know for a fact the fire started in Catherine O'Leary's barn. We'll probably never know how the Great Chicago Fire started. We know it spread north and east very quickly. People thought the river would stop the spread of the fire. The river was so dirty from our garbage, the river caught on fire. The fire burned for 48 straight hours. The only reason the fire was put out, massive thunderstorm came to town. When the fire was out, we assessed the damage and it was bad. 17,000 homes and businesses destroyed. 100,000 people, a third of the population, were left homeless. 300 people lost their lives. It was devastating. People did not think Chicago could rebuild. I think we did a pretty okay job of building. That's how we get the nickname the Second City. Not because we're second to New York. Okay, New York is, that's how they all think. No. It's because we're the second Chicago built on the ashes of the first Chicago. Now, we did such a great job of building that only 19 years after the fire, we were back. We were better than ever. So we needed to let people know we're over for business. So we sent our best politicians to Congress to lobby for the World's Fair of 1893. We beat out New York City, Boston, Washington, D.C., and St. Louis for the rights to the World's Fair. A New York Times reporter was so mad he could not believe Chicago beat New York for the fair. He called our politicians windbags from the Windy City. That's how we got the nickname the Windy City, from our politicians blowing hot air and lies at Congress to win the rights to the fair. He said it must be so windy in Chicago because our politicians say nothing but lies. That's how we got the nickname the Windy City. Now, we are a very windy city. As we tell, we are the windiest metropolitan city in this country.